What's a verb? You're asked this constantly by your teachers and you resort immediately to your primary school answer. It's a doing word. Of course it's a doing word, but it's also a having word and a being word. And in Latin there are 4 types of regular verb, and I'm sure you're already aware that they are called conjugations. But why does Latin have 4 conjugations plus an extra one called 3½? This is the video where everything will be made clear once and for all. And welcome to another session of Lockdown Learning with me, Paul Holland. You're here because you are now on year 9 or 10 or about to take GCSEs in Latin, and you would like to make sure that you understand exactly how those 4 conjugations of verbs work. So as you know, there are 4 families or conjugations of verbs. Don't let the name confuse you. It just means a grouping together of verbs that follow a certain pattern. You come across them in French and Spanish and Italian. They come straight from the Latin. In French you have ER verbs, RE verbs, IR verbs, and it's very similar in Latin. So these are the 4 regular groupings of verbs, although as you'll see, group 3, the 3rd conjugation, tends to be a little bit more unpredictable, but groups 1, 2 and 4 are pretty straightforward, except for the odd exception here and there. So let's have a look at how these actual groups work in practice, and let's see if we can spot all the patterns that we need to know so that we recognize them when we come across them in a particular text. So let's begin with the first group, the first conjugation, and obviously when you first see it in a dictionary, you see it in these 4 parts: amo, amare, amavi and amatum, and I'm sure you're aware of how those work. You've got the present tense, the infinitive, and that always gives you the clue as to whether it's which conjugation it's in, the perfect tense, and the PPP or the supine. And let's just look down the present tense first. The verb amo, one of the most common verbs that people learn when they begin Latin. I love, you love, he or she loves, we love, you plural love, and they love. So nice and clear, and you can see immediately why this is first conjugation, because the letter A dominates all the way down, and that's why we fit it into this particular family. And so just to prove that this is part of the same family, when we look at other tenses for amo, if we look at the imperfect tense, there's the letter A running all the way down it again. When we look at the future tense, there's the letter A again, amabo, amabis, so A, all the way down. And of course, in the perfect tense, you'll see that it's got that A with a V. So amavi, amavisti, amavit, amavimus, amavistis, amaverunt. So that's group 1. Group 2, you might remember, is dominated by an E, not any old E, but a long E, moneo, which even appears in the present tense at first. Moneo, mones, monet, monemus, monetis and monent. And you see that long E again in the imperfect tense, monebam, monebas, monebat, and the future tense, monebo, monebis, etc. Weirdly, in the perfect tense, there's a U, and a lot of people are confused by this at first, but if you remember that a Latin V is effectively a U, isn't it? And it's even pronounced quite similar. In lots of ways, it would have been written as the same letter in ancient times. So that UI, we, wisti, wit, you can imagine it having been spelt once with a U in other forms, or as a V. So they're kind of interchangeable. There's just no E in the perfect tense. That E isn't anywhere to be found, but it certainly is in the rest of them, isn't it? We're going to jump to group 4, partly because it's fairly regular. Group 4, of course, is dominated by the I. So here are your four principal parts, and you can see in the infinitive that gives you a big clue that this is group 4. And if we choose the verb sleeping, here it comes: dormio, dormis, dormit. A little bit like the second conjugation, that I dominates it right from the beginning with an IO at the beginning. Io, is, it, imus, itis, iunt. Watch out for that iunt. There's an U that's suddenly turned up. You'll see that again in a moment in group 3. Don't know where it comes from. You kind of want it just to be an INT, don't you? But it's a U as well, so be careful of that. You'll notice the I also is in the imperfect tense, but there's an extra E as well. Dormiebam, dormiebas, dormiebat. And in the perfect tense, it's quite similar to the first conjugation with a V there. IVI, dormivi, dormivisti, dormivit, all the way down, and the endings are just as you'd expect them to be. So no problems there with the endings. The future tense is a nuisance with the third and fourth groups. The future tense doesn't do what the first two groups did, the bo, bis, bit, bimus, bitis, bunt. Instead, it follows this pattern with am and es and et. But of course, because this is group 4, you've got that I in there. Dormiam, dormies, dormiet, dormiemus, dormietis, dormient. Good. So those are the 3 pretty straightforward ones. That's the first, second, and fourth conjugations. Let's look at the third conjugation. It's the one that people get slightly confused with. Here are your 4 principal parts. Now you'll notice that the E is not a long E, so it's scribere, scribere. It's really short, and that's the difference between the third conjugation and the long E that you saw in the second conjugation. So let's look at the present tense first. It's got an I all the way down, so it looks a little bit like a group 4. Scribo, scribis, scribit, scribimus, scribitis, scribunt. There's that U again that suddenly appears at the end here, scribunt. And the imperfect tense, we've got this long E, scribebam, scribebas, scribebat. Then in the future tense, it goes just like we saw in group 4, but without that extra I. It hasn't got that dominant I, so just scribam, scribes, scribet. But again, it's a slight nuisance, this, isn't it? The group 3 and 4 future tenses just look like something a bit like a present tense, don't they, in some other form? So you don't have that very useful bo, bis, bit, bimus, bitis, bunt to help you out there. You've just got to spot that. And it's in the perfect tense that things become complicated. The perfect tense for group 3 verbs often has a form, a stem, the basic root that you stick the endings on. The endings, you'll notice, are completely regular. Thank God for that. I, isti, it, imus, istis, erunt. But as I say, the root or the stem that they're stuck onto can be a little unpredictable. So scribo goes to scripsi. But here's a list of other ones that you can see that you probably recognize. Duco goes to duxi, dico goes to dixi, lego just stays as leggy. And finally, we have this strange group of verbs that fall between group 3 and group 4. So we tend to call them group 3.5, or sometimes the mixed conjugation. There's only a few of them to remember for GCSE. Perhaps the most common ones are capio, I capture, facio, I do or I make, iaccio, to throw something. When you look at the present tense of these, although it's a short I, not a long I, they basically do look, don't they, like a group 4 conjugation. Let's have a look at capio here and facio, and even in the imperfect tense they also look just like group 4, but the perfect tenses tend to be strange. So kepi for capio, I captured, and facio goes to feci, So that's also slightly different. And there are other ways in which they behave slightly as if they fall between both groups. But not a huge number of them to learn. And as long as you recognize the meanings, that's perhaps the most important thing. Good, so that's verb conjugations, and as you can see, although they look complicated on paper when you see a whole list of them, actually in lots of ways it's just about trying to bring some order, some kind of system to Latin verbs, and once you begin to notice that they all fall into different patterns, that often just makes a lot more sense. So although there'll be moments where you're having to refer to third conjugation this or fourth conjugation verbs that, actually just remember they are a way of systemizing a pretty complex system. And don't forget, if you're doing French or Spanish or Italian, you'll also recognize that they have the same kind of structures in their verbs as well. In fact, it might help you if you're doing both subjects to see those connections between them. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it and it was useful, please subscribe, please like. More importantly, please go and look at the playlist and see if there's anything else that you think might be useful for what you're doing. There's a lot of Latin on there, plus a few other bits and pieces for different subjects that I hope you'll find interesting. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye and see you soon.